The Death Star 2 groaned like a dying beast as its core collapsed from the inside. Metal screamed, fire crawled through the corridors. The throne room, once a place of arrogant power and Sith manipulation, was reduced to rubble. Sparks flew, and the air stank of smoke and plasma. Luke Skywalker knelt beside the battered frame of Darth Vader, or what was left of him. Anakin Skywalker, reborn in the final moments, was now dying, his mechanical body failing after years of torment and dark service. "You were right," Anakin wheezed, his voice cracked and slow. "You were right about me. Tell your sister you were right." Luke's eyes burned. This wasn't how he imagined the end, but he nodded, fighting the sting behind his eyes. "I won't leave you here." "You already have," Anakin said, his strength draining like the last light of a dying star. Luke held him tighter, feeling the weight of his father's redemption, too late to change anything. He reached out with the Force, tried to preserve what he could, but the Death Star was breaking apart around them. He had to go. He carried Vader's body to the shuttle bay just in time. The Lambda-class shuttle, Tidarium, was still operational. Luke fired up the engines as the station began to tear itself apart. A great pulse surged beneath the surface. The core was going critical. Then, silence. From the forests of Endor below, the rebels watched the sky. Lando and Wedge had made it out. The Millennium Falcon danced away from the growing fireball. In space, the second Death Star exploded in a massive burst of blue and white energy. Leia gasped, tears in her eyes. Han wrapped his arms around her. They had done it. The Empire was dead. But somewhere, deep in the twisted remains of the Death Star's underbelly, something still breathed. The fall had been endless, a spiraling descent through the reactor shaft, Palpatine's lightning arcing wildly around him, his shrieks of betrayal echoing off the steel. But just before the blinding heat of the core, a flicker of instinct, a twist, a shift, a pulling of power. The dark side wrapped around him like a shadowed cocoon, thick and hungry. He didn't die. He disappeared. They thought they'd killed him. They thought justice had been served. But Palpatine had spent a lifetime planning for betrayal. Project Cinder, contingency protocols, clones, secrets buried in Sith temples across forgotten worlds. A man doesn't build an empire without building insurance. A single dark escape pod launched from the station seconds before total destruction. No one saw it. No one tracked it. It drifted in the debris field for hours, cold and silent. Then a signal blinked. Out in the unknown regions, past charted hyperspace lanes, and beyond the fringes of sanity, ancient followers responded. Droids, cultists, remnants of the Sith Eternal. They brought the Emperor's ruined body to Exegol. Palpatine's hands were blackened stumps. His eyes bled yellow, his spine twisted, and his voice was a dry rasp that barely escaped his lips. But he was alive, and he was more dangerous than ever. Months passed. The new republic formed on the ashes of the Empire. Politicians raised flags over empty cities. Star destroyers were grounded, prisoners processed. The galaxy began to exhale. Luke stood alone on a rocky cliff on Achto, staring at the waves crashing beneath him. He couldn't shake it. A pressure in the Force. A wrongness. At night, he dreamed of lightning again, of cold laughter. Leia felt it too. She had tried to dismiss it. There was so much to do. She was helping organize the new republic, uniting systems, planning for a new Jedi order, but she kept waking up in cold sweats. Sometimes she'd walk the palace corridors and swear she heard footsteps behind her, whispers, a voice that once haunted her childhood. Now back again. On Exegol, Palpatine sat atop a throne of obsidian. His body was failing, barely held together by Sith alchemy and cybernetics. But his mind, his hate, was sharper than ever. "They celebrated," he hissed to the shadows. "They danced on my grave." Acolytes in red robes knelt around him. The air crackled with dark energy. Giant machines churned behind them, cloning tanks bubbling, strange creations forming within. One of the cultists approached, kneeling. "My lord, Project Shadow Veil is ready." "Then let the veil fall," Palpatine whispered. In the deepest corners of the galaxy, sleeper agents activated. Former Imperial officers received coded transmissions. A hidden fleet, hidden for years, stirred beneath a frozen moon. Palpatine didn't want to win a war. He wanted to erase hope itself. Luke returned to Coruscant weeks later. He stood before the New Republic Council, his face grave. "Something survived the Death Star. I feel it. He's not gone." Mon Mothma frowned. "We watched the station explode, Master Skywalker." Luke shook his head. "I watched Vader die, but I never saw the Emperor's body. The dark side has a way of cheating death." Han stood at the back of the room, arms folded. "You think the old bastard is still out there?" Leia, pale and distant, finally whispered, "He is." Everyone turned to her. "I felt him, in dreams, in my son." She touched her stomach unconsciously. She hadn't even told Luke she was pregnant yet. "He's watching us." The room fell silent, and far, far away. Palpatine smiled. He reached into the Force and whispered a word, a name. Ben. 6 months had passed since the Empire's fall. The galaxy, once bound in fear and tyranny, now basked in the illusion of peace. Coruscant glittered again, its skyline busy with diplomats, transports, and hopeful chatter about rebuilding. Mon Mothma led the New Republic from the ancient Senate chamber, promising unity and healing. Statues of the Emperor were toppled across 1,000 worlds, replaced with banners of freedom. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. Systems in the mid-rim reported strange raids, not pirates, not mercenaries. These were coordinated, surgical. Starships moved like Imperial fleets, yet bore no insignias. Their attacks were swift, brutal, and quiet. Survivors said nothing. Entire colonies simply vanished. The Council dismissed them at first. Isolated incidents, fringe instability. But Leia knew better. She stood in her private quarters in the heart of the Senate complex, her hand resting on the soft curve of her belly. The child inside stirred, just enough for her to feel it. Life, so new, so innocent, and yet something dark pressed against her from within the Force. She could feel it growing stronger every day, a whisper, not from the child, from something else, watching, waiting. Meanwhile, Luke stood atop the Jedi temple ruins on Ossus, staring into the sky. He had been seeking answers, meditating with ancient holocrons, chasing visions across long-dead worlds. But everywhere he looked, the same thing came to him: fire, lightning, and laughter echoing from the stars. Palpatine's voice. He had tried to push it away. He had told himself it was memory, fear, unresolved guilt, but it was real, and he could no longer deny it. That day, as the sun dipped beneath the ruins, he reached out with the Force as far as he could, not to attack, not to defend, to listen. What came back was a scream, a voice, familiar and hollow, crying out across the stars. "He lives." Luke dropped to his knees. On Exegol, the storm thickened. Darkness twisted in the sky like a wounded serpent. Lightning crashed constantly across the black spires of the Sith citadel. Inside, the Emperor's ruined body sat suspended in a mechanical rig. His spine no longer supported him. His voice came through a modulator now, distorted and broken. But his mind was fire. Beside him stood Commander Sloane, a loyal Imperial who had disappeared after Jakku. She stared at a new kind of star destroyer being constructed in orbit above the planet, massive and blood-red, each one carrying a planetary cannon beneath its belly. She turned to the throne. "Is it time, my lord?" Palpatine didn't move. His yellow eyes gleamed through the shadows. No, let the Republic fatten itself first. Let them believe in peace. We will feed on their joy, then crush it. He lifted one skeletal hand, fingers twitching with arcs of lightning. A monitor lit up, showing a small image, grainy and flickering. A woman, a baby forming inside her. "Soon," Palpatine whispered. "The boy will be born. He will be mine." Sloane frowned. "The solo child." Palpatine didn't answer. He didn't need to. Leia found Luke on Naboo, meditating at the edge of a still lake. She didn't speak for a long time, just stood beside him as the wind carried soft waves toward the rocks. "You feel it too," she finally said. Luke opened his eyes. "It's him. I know." He turned to look at her, eyes searching. Her face. "When did it start?" "The day the Death Star exploded." Luke's jaw clenched. "We should have known. He was too powerful, too prepared." Leia looked away. "I tried to warn the Council again. They think we're both just paranoid, worn out from war." Luke shook his head. "No, they're blind." They sat in silence. "He's not going to stay hidden forever," Leia whispered. "Whatever he's building us, it's already begun." Luke stood slowly. "Then we have to prepare too. We need to rebuild the Jedi." She placed her hand on her stomach. "And what about the next generation?" Luke didn't answer right away. His gaze fell to her belly, and something twisted in his expression. "We protect them," he said softly, "at any cost." In the outer rim, near the edge of wild space, a hidden transmission crackled to life aboard a derelict star destroyer. A lone survivor, a former Republic scout, found the bridge abandoned, but the ship's systems were active. Lights flickered, consoles blinked, and a message repeated in Sith binary code: "Operation Resurrection underway. The Emperor lives." The scout barely had time to turn before the shadow struck him, a tall, armored figure with a voice that sounded more machine. "Then man!" "You weren't meant to hear that," the shadow said before the blade ignited. Blood hit the floor, the signal cut. Back on Coruscant, Leia felt a cold jolt run through her body, as if something somewhere had just died. She stood on her balcony, staring out over the city. The air felt thicker than usual, wrong. Then a whisper in her mind: "He will be mine. Princess." Her eyes widened. She turned around, breathing hard, but the room was empty. The whisper had already vanished. Hosnian Prime never saw it coming. It was a bright morning over the capital, the air buzzing with repulsor lift traffic and the buzz of progress. Speeder lanes hummed over the skyline. Children laughed in plazas near the Senate Dome, and for the first time in years, the galaxy felt alive. The New Republic was hosting its annual Unity Day. Leaders from hundreds of systems gathered beneath banners of peace. Veterans of the rebellion gave speeches hailed as heroes. Statues of Mon Mothma and Bail Organa stood newly unveiled. And in orbit, the pride of the New Republic, the Unity Fleet, hovered like a shield of hope, until the stars began to blink. One by one, lights in the sky faded, the sun dimmed unnaturally. Confused citizens pointed upward. Then, out of the darkness, they came. 30 ships, blood-red hulls, designs that looked imperial but twisted, more advanced, crueler in shape. They dropped from hyperspace without warning, silent and monstrous. No transponder codes, no hails. Just one repeating transmission in distorted, static, warped basic. "The Emperor commands, the veil is torn." And then the sky opened. The first blasts hit the Unity fleet before their shields even finished powering up. Star destroyers with blackened spires rained turbo-laser fire onto the helpless ships. Above, explosions bloomed in the upper atmosphere, debris falling like meteors. Screams filled the comm channels. Pilots scrambled to launch, but there was no battle, only slaughter. On the ground, panic spread like wildfire. The New Republic Senate building was struck by an energy beam that vaporized 3 city blocks in an instant. Civilians ran in every direction, crying out for help. Children were trampled. Officers shouted into dead comms. This wasn't war. This was execution. And at the center of it, from the lead destroyer, a voice reached out. Leia collapsed mid-speech, gasping for air. She gripped the edge of the podium as her knees buckled. Blood trickled from her nose, her vision blurred. He was speaking to her. In her mind, cold and clear as glass, "This is my galaxy, Leia. You were only ever caretakers." Leia's scream tore through the panic. Luke felt it at the exact moment. On Ossus, he'd been meditating, seated beneath the ancient Jedi tree, reaching out to long-forgotten echoes. He had just felt a flicker, a child strong in the Force born on a remote world, when his body jolted like lightning had struck it. His breath caught in his chest. Visions. He saw Leia on fire. Buildings falling, a planet screaming, and above it all, in a throne of bone and steel, the Emperor smiling. Luke leapt to his feet. He ran to the comms unit and opened a secure transmission to Leia. No answer. His hands trembled. He keyed in the override codes. Still nothing. Then static, and a single phrase came through, soaked in darkness. "Your order will die before it begins, Skywalker." On Hosnian Prime, Leia stumbled through a burning hallway, helped by 2 aides. Alarms blared all around them. Outside the windows, the sky was choked with smoke and the falling wreckage of orbital ships. Bodies littered the walkways. Droids screamed warnings in every language. A wall exploded just ahead, and a squad of troopers entered, not Republic soldiers. They wore crimson armor, featureless masks, and moved in silence. The aides tried to draw weapons. They never got the chance. Blaster bolts slammed through their chests, and Leia was flung backward by the shockwave. Her ears rang. Her hands were covered in blood. One of the masked troopers stepped forward, weapon raised, but he paused. Another figure entered behind him, tall, cloaked, gliding. Leia didn't need to see his face. She felt the dark side roiling off him like a storm. "Lady Organa!" the cloaked figure rasped, his voice digitally filtered. "The Emperor sends his regards." Leia lifted her chin despite the pain. "Tell him I remember how he screamed when Vader threw him to his death." The figure stepped closer. "He lives because of your mercy, and now your child will carry his will." Her breath caught. "How do you know about—" Before she could finish, a blast rocked the building again. A nearby turbolift collapsed, triggering a chain reaction that tore through the wall between them. Leia was thrown back, shielded by rubble. When she looked again, the figure was gone. Luke arrived too late. By the time his X-Wing reached Hosnian space, the enemy fleet had already jumped away. Only wreckage remained. The city burned. Fire reflected in the lakes. Millions dead. Luke landed in the outskirts and moved through the smoking streets like a ghost. Bodies lined the roads. Emergency droids buzzed overhead, scanning for survivors. Most of the Senate was gone. But Leia lived. He found her in a medical transport ship wrapped in a blanket, shaking but silent. He knelt beside her. "Leia." She turned slowly. Her face was bruised, her hair singed, but her eyes, they were fierce again. "He was there," she said. "Not just his soldiers. He was there. In my mind." Luke nodded. "I felt it too." They were quiet for a moment. Then Leia whispered, "He's going to try to take my son." Luke's breath caught. "Then we stop him." She looked at him. "How?" Luke didn't speak for a long time. Then finally he said, "We stop pretending peace is enough." Far away, aboard the lead Star Destroyer above the burning ruins of Hosnian Prime, a masked figure entered the Emperor's chamber and knelt. Palpatine sat in silence, the flickering lights of fire reflecting off his pale, ruined skin. The figure lowered his hood. Sloane stepped forward beside the throne. "This is him, my lord, one of many, born of your design." Palpatine smiled, with cracked lips. "Yes, I feel him, the blood of Skywalker, the seed of darkness." He reached out a hand, clawed and shaking, placing it on the boy's forehead. "Soon, he will be called Ben no longer." The ash of Hosnian Prime still clung to Leia's skin days after the attack, even after medical treatment and cleansing droids had done their work. It wasn't just the physical aftermath, it was the memory. It stained her like soot in the soul. They'd moved her to a safe house deep in the core. The council, now reduced to a fraction of its former size, was scattered and frightened. They argued over hiding, over surrender, over negotiating with an enemy they still refused to name. But Leia knew the truth. There would be no negotiations, there was no mercy coming, and there was no room left for hope unless someone rose to meet the darkness head-on. She placed her hand on her stomach again. The baby was moving more now, restless, almost agitated. "Easy, little one," she whispered. "You feel it too, don't you?" The future was closing in fast, and it was bringing a storm. Luke returned to Ossus with fire in his eyes. He didn't bother with Jedi serenity anymore. There was no time for peace when the galaxy was being carved open. He activated old holocrons, whispered through dusty temples, and meditated through sleepless nights, all for one goal: to rebuild the Jedi, not the pristine, cautious order of the Republic era. That version had failed. It had sat on thrones while Sith rose in shadows. Luke didn't want monks. He needed warriors, seekers of balance who could feel both sides of the Force and not be consumed. His first step took him to the desert moon of Arcanis. There, he found a girl named Kyra, a scavenger with strange abilities who claimed she could sense the intentions of people before they spoke. She'd survived 3 years in slaver camps without ever drawing a weapon. Luke watched her calm, a wild rancor with nothing but a look. That was all the proof he needed. "Come with me," he told her. "To do what?" she asked. "To fight a war we're already losing." She shrugged. "Sounds like every day on this moon." In the icy canyons of Mahaska, he found a Force-sensitive boy named Tien, orphaned by Imperial remnants, who had built his own staff saber from scrap. He'd trained himself by watching smuggler holovids and fighting wild creatures for food. Tien asked no questions, just nodded. "Do I get to kill the people who did this to my village?" Luke hesitated, then said, "You'll learn how to choose when to fight and when not to." Tien just smirked. Too late for that. By the end of the month, Luke had 4 new students. Not many, but more than he dared hope for. He returned to Ossus and began rebuilding the temple, a small one, stone walls and open-air chambers, built by hand with no droids, no fanfare. He wanted them to understand the Force through work, not just power. But even as he trained them, he felt the darkness creeping closer. Every time he reached out in meditation, he sensed eyes watching him. Not just one set, dozens, hunters, and worse. Something beneath all of it, a source, a wound in the Force itself. Palpatine's hands trembled with anticipation. In his laboratory deep within Exegol, he stared into a vat containing the latest iteration of his clone experiments. The boy inside was only 10, maybe 11, but his connection to the Force pulsed like wildfire. A mix of bloodlines, Skywalker, Sidious, something older, something buried, not quite a clone, not quite a son, something in between. Sloane stood beside him, and the others. "Let them run," Palpatine rasped. "Let Skywalker play Jedi again. We will test his faith." He gestured to a group of red-armored warriors kneeling at the foot of the chamber. Their faces were hidden, their minds broken and rebuilt by Sith alchemy. They were not Inquisitors, they were not Sith. They were something worse. The Reapers. "You know your task," Palpatine hissed. "Track them, hunt them, one by one. Make them fear the very force they worship." That night, Luke had a dream. He stood in the temple courtyard, watching his students laugh under a starlit sky. Then everything slowed, froze. He turned and saw a man, cloaked in shadow, walking toward him across the stones. The stars above turned red. The wind died. Luke reached for his saber, but it was gone. The figure raised a hand and whispered, "Ben." Luke jolted awake, sweat pouring down his face. Kira was standing in the doorway, staring at him. "You felt that too?" she whispered. Luke nodded slowly. "They're coming." The first death came 3 days later. Tien had gone to gather supplies from a nearby trading post. His body was found in the forest, burned from the inside out. His saber was missing. No tracks, no evidence. Only a mark carved into the tree behind him, a jagged black spiral, bleeding corruption into the wood. The Reapers had found them. Luke stood over the boy's grave with fists clenched, his knuckles white with fury. "No more," he muttered. "I won't let this order fall before it begins." Kira stood beside him. "Then we hit them first." Luke nodded, but his heart was heavy. This wasn't a battle of skill anymore. It was faith versus fanaticism, memory versus monsters. And the longer it went on, the more he wondered. Was he strong enough to finish what he started? Leia watched. The night sky from her safe house on Chandrila. The stars looked cold. She could feel the weight of destiny pressing on her, not hers but her son's. The unborn child inside her pulsed with light. But she could feel the pull of something else too, something lurking just behind that light, something hungry. Her dreams were turning darker. She saw herself screaming, holding a saber. She saw Han, older, walking away, and Luke, broken. She saw her son wearing a mask, and behind that mask, yellow eyes. On Exegol, Palpatine stirred. He looked up from his throne and whispered again into the void, "Ben." And this time across the galaxy. The child heard him. The Jedi temple on Ossus was quiet before dawn. Luke stood beneath the stars, his eyes fixed on the horizon where darkness met stone. The grave markers of the fallen were still fresh, Tien's most of all. His death had shaken the others, and Luke could feel the weight of it hanging over his small group like a storm cloud. But it wasn't fear that pressed against him. It was anger. Kira stepped out beside him, her expression unreadable. Her hands were wrapped in cloth, bruised from days of training, sparring and rage she didn't know how to name. "They'll come again," she said softly. Luke nodded. "No, we go to them first." The Reaper base wasn't on any charted world, but Kyra had traced one of the sabers the Reapers used, deep into the ancient wreckage of an old Imperial outpost on the moon of Varkor. A black place, cold, dry, steeped in the dark side. A place that reeked of long-dead cruelty and forgotten war. Luke took her and 2 others, the last of his students, to strike first. They didn't fly Republic ships. No, that would make them targets. He used an old cargo hauler from Lothal, barely spaceworthy. They flew low and fast, slipping past the dying atmosphere of Varkor and landing in silence. The base was built into the rock, hidden behind a false canyon wall. It took hours to find it, but when they entered, they found nothing alive, only rows of empty cells, scorch marks, dried blood, and a message burned into the metal above the control terminal in jagged, force-warped script. "You were too late." Again. Then the lights went red, and the Reapers struck. They moved like shadows, fast, silent, filled with hate. The battle that followed was brutal. One of Luke's students, a quiet girl named Reva, was cut down trying to protect Kyra, Her scream echoed through the caverns. Luke's fury boiled over. His green saber came alive in a roar of light, and for the first time since the war, he let himself fully embrace the Force in battle, not with fear, not with vengeance, but with fire. He cut down 3 Reapers before they even touched the ground, sent 2 more flying into steel walls with a flick of his wrist. His mind burned with focus, but it wasn't enough. One of the Reapers got behind Kira. Luke turned too late. The blade came down and stopped an inch from her skull. Kira had caught it with her bare hands. The saber hissed and screamed, the energy blade blistering her skin, but she didn't flinch. She held it and then, with a growl, turned it off, using the Force, and drove the hilt into her attacker's throat. Luke stared at her, stunned. There was a coldness in her eyes, power, and something darker. The rest of the Reapers fled, but Luke had seen enough. Back on Ossus, he tended to Kira's hands. They were blistered raw, glowing faintly with angry heat. "You didn't hesitate," he said quietly. "I had no choice." He studied her. "You used anger." She didn't deny it. "I used. What worked?" Luke sat back, weary. "You can't let it in too far," he warned. "That path, you think you control it, but it controls you." Kira's eyes narrowed. "So we're just supposed to die by the rules of a Jedi code that already failed?" Luke didn't answer, because deep down, she wasn't wrong. Far across the stars, Leia was gripped by agony. It was too early. The medic said her baby wasn't due for weeks, but something was forcing the labor. Not naturally. The Force itself was being twisted, pulled. Leia screamed as another wave of pain ripped through her. She could feel it, hands reaching for her unborn child, invisible but real. She called for Luke through the Force. He heard her instantly. He dropped everything and launched toward Chandrila without delay. But he was too far. Leia was alone. In the shadows of the birthing chamber, one of the nurses turned slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes yellow. She leaned close to Leia's ear and whispered, "He's coming, Your Highness. He hears you screaming." Leia cried out, swinging her arm with a surge of the Force, sending the nurse crashing into the far wall. The woman vanished into shadow, but the message had been delivered. Ben Solo was born during the storm. His cry echoed through the medical wing. His heartbeat was strong. His eyes were closed tight, fists curled like little stars ready to ignite. Leia held him, weak and breathless, tears sliding down her face. But something was wrong. He wasn't crying from fear or discomfort. He was silent now, too silent. He was listening. Outside, thunder cracked, and not from weather. On Exegol, Palpatine screamed with laughter. "The boy is born," he croaked, lightning flickering between his fingers. "The bloodline is mine again." Sloane watched from the shadows, unsure if her master's mind was slipping further, or sharpening like a blade. Palpatine lifted one gnarled finger and pointed toward the stars. "Bring me the child," he said. "Let Skywalker try to hide him. Let the mother cling to hope. He will come to me, and when he does, he will end them all." Sloane bowed her head. "Yes, my lord." Outside the chamber, in a hidden vault, dozens of clones floated in, stasis tanks, twisted attempts at perfecting the Skywalker line, but only one now mattered. Ben. Leia sat alone in the nursery, watching her son sleep. Luke arrived hours later, breathless, furious with himself. "I'm sorry," he said. "I wasn't fast enough." Leia looked at him with tired eyes. "You were never going to be. Not with him." Luke stared at the baby. "He's strong, too strong." Luke hesitated. "You think he felt the Emperor?" Leia nodded slowly. "He didn't just feel him." She looked down at her son. "He heard him." Luke knelt, placing a gentle hand on the child's chest. Ben stirred, and somewhere far away, So did the dark. Ossus burned. The smoke rolled over the cliffs like a black tide, choking the skies and dimming the stars. Screams echoed through. The valleys, the Jedi temple, Luke's last hope for a new beginning, was collapsing into itself. The Reapers had come at night, during a rare moment of stillness. They didn't fire from orbit, they didn't launch a siege. They walked in, one by one. A dozen cloaked figures with glowing red visors and blades that shrieked like the dead. No ships, no warning. As if they'd emerged straight from the ground, Kira had been the first to sense them. She woke in a cold sweat, the Force screaming in her chest. By the time she got outside, the first student was already dead, throat carved open, saber stolen, and in the center of the courtyard, etched into the stone in fresh blood. You were warned. Luke fought like he hadn't since the Death Star, not against droids or bounty hunters, but against darkness-wearing faces. He deflected one blade, then two, spinning across the steps of the temple. The Reapers didn't talk. They didn't even breathe loud. He cut down one with a blast of Force energy. Another collapsed after Kira severed his leg. But more kept coming. The students were overwhelmed. This wasn't training anymore. This was execution. Luke shouted through the Force, "Fall back! Get to the cliffs!" 3 students ran. Only 2 made it. The Reapers followed the third, dragging her screaming into the shadows. Luke leapt after them, but Kira stopped him. "We can't save everyone," she snapped. Luke hesitated. "That's not the Jedi way." Her eyes burned. "Then maybe the Jedi way is wrong." They fell back to the forge chamber, the lowest part of the temple, reinforced by stone and the Force itself. Luke sealed the doors with a thought, his hands trembling, his chest heaving. Kira stood across from him, saber still humming. 4 students remained, 4 out of 12. The others were gone, lost to darkness. Kira looked at him with quiet fury. They came for the girl, the one who heard the song. Luke froze. "What girl?" Kira's voice dropped. "The one who said she dreamed of a red sun, that it was calling her, that she felt it through the Force." Luke swallowed hard. That girl had been asking about Exegol. She was the first, and now she was gone. Leia felt the fire from halfway across the galaxy. She clutched her child tight as her vision blurred, a wave of black fear washing over her like ice water. Ben was sleeping, peaceful, unaware, but inside her the Force screamed with pain. Han found her in the corner of the nursery, curled up, trembling. "Leia," he whispered, "what's happening?" She looked at him, her voice cracking. "They're killing the Jedi." Han's face hardened. "Where?" "Ossus." Without hesitation, he turned and shouted, "Get the Falcon ready, now!" Leia looked down at Ben. He stirred, and for a moment, she saw his eyes flicker open. Gold. The next morning, the temple stood in silence. Smoke rose from the crumbled spires. The front hall had been desecrated, scriptures burned, lightsabers shattered. Reapers didn't take prisoners. They left wounds. Luke stood over the bodies of 2 students they'd managed to recover. He didn't speak, just knelt, placed his hand on their chests, and whispered something too soft to hear. Kira stood behind him. "We're not enough." He didn't respond. "They're not trying to kill us, Luke. They're trying to infect us, twist us." Luke nodded. "I know." "Then why are we still fighting like we're saving something sacred? There's nothing sacred left." He looked up at her. "We're not fighting to save the past. We're fighting to protect the future." She frowned. "What future?" He didn't answer, because he didn't know anymore. On Exegol, Palpatine watched through an obsidian lens, a Sith artifact, that allowed him to see through the eyes of his hunters. He saw Luke. He saw Kira. He laughed, a rasping, broken laugh that echoed through the chamber like metal scraping bone. "They're breaking," he whispered, "piece by piece." Sloane stepped forward. The girl, the one who resisted, she's growing stronger. Palpatine nodded. Yes, Kira. She will either be our weapon or our warning. And the boy. Palpatine turned to a floating hologram of Ben Solo. Still a baby, still fragile. But power crackled around him like static. He hears me, Palpatine whispered. He doesn't know the words yet, but he feels the truth. One day he'll come, and when he does, Luke will break. Back on Ossus, Luke gathered what remained. He stood before the survivors in the ruins of the courtyard. The Jedi were never meant to be an army, he said. But we are no longer just guardians. We're targets. They're hunting us not because we're a threat, but because we're a promise. A promise of what? Kira asked. Luke looked up. Of resistance. He pulled a small holomap from his cloak and activated it. These are force-sensitive children, he said, scattered across the galaxy, hidden. I've felt them in meditation. The Reapers will find them first, unless we do. Kira's voice was hard. Then we train harder. We strike first, and if the code doesn't like it, then we rewrite it, Luke said. The room went quiet, because no one, not even Kira, expected to hear that from him. In the shadows of the cliffs, one Reaper still lived. He'd been wounded in the assault, left behind, his mask cracked open. As he crawled through the rock, bleeding, he activated his emergency beacon. A cold, whispering voice answered. Did he see the message? The Reaper coughed blood. Yes, my lord. And the girl? She's becoming unpredictable. The voice laughed softly. Good, let them believe they have time. Let them cling to hope. The beacon sparked, then exploded, and the blood soaked into the stone. The ship they took was old, a retrofitted diplomatic cruiser Luke had once used on diplomatic runs between Naboo and Mon Cala. It had been gathering dust since the Empire fell, forgotten like so much else. Now it was a lifeboat. Luke, Kira, and the last of the young Jedi left Ossus behind. They didn't hold a funeral for the temple. There was nothing left to bury. And besides, the galaxy didn't mourn Jedi anymore. They were ghosts, relics, hunted shadows. They split their search across multiple hyperspace coordinates, each a possible home to a force-sensitive child. The map Luke had crafted was incomplete, assembled from fragments of ancient Jedi scrolls, whispers in the Force, and dreams. They didn't have time for planning. They were trying to outrun death. Kira wasn't sleeping. She hadn't really slept since the Reaper attack. She paced the ship at night, her hands twitching, her saber always nearby. She could still feel the blood of the one she killed on her skin, even though Luke told her she did what was necessary. She didn't want to feel good about it, but sometimes she did, and that terrified her more than anything. She stood in the cockpit staring at hyperspace. "Why do they care so much?" she asked aloud. Luke didn't answer right away. He stood behind her, quiet as always. "They're afraid of what we'll become," he said eventually. "What you might become." She turned, eyes sharp. "Why me?" He hesitated. "Because you've already touched the edge." Kyra's voice was bitter. "Then maybe they're right to be afraid." Elsewhere, Ben Solo screamed. He was just a child, barely crawling. But when the vision came, his mind cracked open like glass under pressure. He saw fire, planets breaking, a cloaked figure reaching toward him. He was no longer in his nursery, no longer on Chandrila. He was walking older, stronger, through a throne room made of stone and bone. Voices chanted in a language he didn't understand. His hands glowed with power. A saber crackled red in his fist. He turned and saw Luke. Luke raised his blade. Ben screamed again, louder this time. Leia burst into the room, scooping him up. His face was wet with sweat, trembling. His little fists clenched into her robes. Han appeared in the doorway, half-dressed. "What happened?" Leia stared. At her son, her heart pounding. I don't know. But that was a lie. She knew. Palpatine watched from his throne. The vision had worked. Sith artifacts, hidden near the child's safe house, masked from Jedi senses, were broadcasting dark energy directly into the infant's subconscious. He couldn't speak, couldn't reason, but he could feel. And feelings leave cracks. Cracks that let monsters in. Sloane stepped forward. He is awakening fast, faster than even you predicted. Palpatine smiled, or tried to. His face twitched. Skywalker will try to reach him first. Should we stop him? No, Palpatine whispered. Let him come. The closer he gets, the more he leads the boy to me. Luke arrived on the rain-swept world of Dagonhole with 2 students and Kira. The city was carved into the cliffs, tight, industrial, with steam rising from every grate and blade vendors on every corner. It reeked of survival and people who hated war but didn't fear it. The child they came for was hidden in a shipping district, disguised by a spice runner family who once served the Empire, now trying to make amends. Luke found the girl in a maintenance tunnel, playing with a broken lightsaber crystal like it was a marble. She looked up as he approached. Did you come because I saw the fire too? Luke knelt. Yes. Her name was Miri. She was 8. She spoke like someone who had lived through 4 lifetimes already. Kira stood back, watching the girl carefully. She's like me, Miri said to Luke, but colder. Kira raised a brow. Excuse me? She burns, Miri whispered, pointing at her, like the ones who came before. Luke felt it too, in the Force. Miri's connection was deep, but chaotic, wild. If she wasn't trained, she would tear herself apart. He had no choice. You're coming with us, Luke said. Miri didn't argue, she just nodded. That night, while the others slept, Kira slipped outside the ship. She stood in the dark alleyways of Dagonhole, staring up at the polluted sky. She wasn't just hearing voices anymore. She was feeling pulled. And when she closed her eyes, she saw him, a throne room, cold, wet metal, Palpatine, barely alive, yet more powerful than ever. He reached toward her and said her name, Kira. She jerked awake, gasping, hand on her saber. But no one was there. Leia sat with Ben in her lap, whispering stories of Alderaan, of hope, of stars that sang. But Ben was no longer listening. His eyes, once warm and curious, were distant now, like he was already looking far beyond her, like he was already hearing someone else. And somewhere, deep in the darkness of the Force, Palpatine whispered, soon. The sky above Exegol boiled black with constant lightning. Star destroyers hung like fangs above the planet's surface, their crimson underbellies lit by engines that never powered down. The planet groaned, unnatural, a place not meant to exist, carved from ancient Sith sorcery and endless hate. Luke stood at the edge of a massive stone bridge, staring at the structure ahead. A temple, no, a monument to control. Dark spires reached into the storm, jagged like claws. The ground pulsed beneath his boots, like the planet itself had a heartbeat. Behind him stood Kira, beside her the child Miri, the last student, the last chance. We don't have time, Kira said. He knows we're here. Luke nodded. Then let's not keep him waiting. Leia sat on the Falcon, orbiting Chandrila. She didn't know why she suddenly couldn't breathe. She clutched Ben to her chest, rocking him as he whimpered, in his sleep, but his little body was tense. His eyes moved under their lids like he was locked in a nightmare, and Leia felt it in her bones. This was the moment. Everything would either end or begin again. Palpatine sat atop his throne of obsidian, held aloft by massive stone slabs carved with ancient Sith runes. Tubes slithered from his spine. His hands, twisted and half dead, crackled with sickly sparks of red and blue. "Skywalker," he hissed as Luke stepped into the chamber, "you've brought your students to die." "I've brought them to end you," Luke said quietly. Palpatine smiled with broken teeth. "End me? Oh, my boy, I already ended you. The night you spared your father, the moment you let me fall without finishing what you started, I have lived through your mercy." He turned his eyes to Kira. "But her, she is not you." Kira stepped forward. Her saber was still at her side. Her hand trembled slightly. "You've been in my head," she said. "Since Ossus." Palpatine nodded. "Because you are mine, child. You were forged in fire, born in war. You kill when others hesitate. You fight with passion, emotion. You already walk the path of power. All you lack is purpose." He reached out one hand. "Join me, sit beside me, burn this rotting galaxy down and rebuild it in our image." Kira looked at Luke, then looked down at her burned hands and took a step forward. Miri screamed. "Don't!" Kira froze. The scream hit her like a punch to the gut. Not just sound, but truth. In that moment, Kira didn't see power. She saw death, not her own, not Luke's, everyone's. She saw herself atop that throne in years to come, ruling nothing but cinders. Her saber dripping with the blood of innocence, her name cursed across 1,000 worlds. And she saw Miri, begging her to stop. Kira turned away from the Emperor. "No." Palpatine's smile vanished. "So be it." The entire chamber trembled. Reapers emerged from the shadows, dozens of them, more than ever before. All armed, all ready. "Then you all die together." Luke ignited his saber. Kira lit hers beside him. Miri stepped behind them and raised her hands. And then the Force itself exploded. The battle was chaos. Luke moved like lightning, precise, silent, unstoppable. His blade cut through the Reapers with surgical calm. Kira was fire, wild and vengeful, unleashing every part of her that she'd held back. Miri didn't use a blade. She used will. Every Reaper that tried to touch her dropped their weapon, sobbing. Some collapsed and never got up again. She wasn't just strong, she was balanced. She was what the Jedi were meant to be. And Palpatine felt fear, real fear. For the first time in years, Luke reached the throne. Palpatine launched lightning from both hands, screaming, blasting Luke to the ground. Kira screamed and charged, but he hurled her into the stone wall with a single gesture. Miri tried to block him, but the lightning arced too wide, too wild. Then everything stopped. A presence had entered the room, small, soft, but undeniable. Ben Solo. He was there, not physically, but through the Force. Palpatine's head whipped around. "No!" Leia stood on the falcon, holding her son, whispering words she didn't even know. Her tears hit his forehead. She poured every memory, every ounce of love into him. "You are not his," she said. "You are ours, and you will never be his." Ben opened his eyes, and across the galaxy, the throne room began to shake. Palpatine screamed as Ben's presence burned through the chamber. He tried to anchor himself, but it was like being caught in a sunbeam. The boy was still a baby, and yet he was everywhere. Ben's essence reached for Luke, for Kira, for Miri, and through them it pushed back against the dark. Luke rose to his feet, so did Kira. Palpatine shouted in rage, and Luke's saber pierced his chest. Kira's saber followed. The Reapers screamed and fell dead instantly, their minds connected to his will. The throne cracked, the ceiling collapsed. Palpatine's last words were not screams, they were whispers. "You'll never stop it. He will come to me." And then he was gone, for real, forever. Silence. Luke fell to his knees. Kira sat in the rubble, covered in dust, staring at the spot where the Emperor had stood. Miri stood between them, hands still glowing faintly. Luke looked up. "It's over." Kira shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "It's just beginning." 1 week later, Ossus was quiet again. The rebuilding had started, slowly. The new temple wouldn't be made of stone. It would be made of people. Kira was now the first teacher. She had scars and sometimes her hands shook, but she smiled more. Luke watched the stars every night, still wondering if he'd done enough. And far away, Leia held Ben close. She knew the darkness hadn't vanished completely. It had just been pushed back. For now. But the future wasn't written in fire anymore. It was written in choice. And Ben Solo, still dreaming, but not of thrones, not of lightning. He dreamed of stars. And one day, that would be enough.